Don't say anything you will regret.
You're good to go.
Okay. We're going to get started here. Welcome everybody to the second city council orientation that we've ever done. We did one back in 2019. And the idea is just to kind of give everybody an idea of what is involved if you run and are successful in becoming getting on council. I'm Mark Cundiff. I'm the city manager. In the back row is some of the staff: Barbara Dahlworth, community development director; Jeff Amick, law director; Ginger Adams, finance director. You want me to start over? Oh, Carrie Egbert, city clerk. And I don't know if you just want to go around and introduce yourselves to everybody. Start.
I'm Joe Mariachi. My name is Nabil Mendel.
My name is Zachary Hill.
Steve Wagner.
Colin Claywell, Board of Elections.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we're going to get started here. Or do I need to click this? Okay. Bear with me, I'm old and technologically challenged. So this is what we're going to follow today. I'm going to start off with giving a quick organizational overview and information on the form of government. And then Ginger is going to talk about the city finances. Jeff's going to talk about the Ohio Ethics Law, Public Records Law, and Open Meetings Act. Barbara's going to talk about campaign sign laws, and then Carrie is going to then talk candidate resources, and then Colin is going to talk about the election overview. So, organizational overview. City of Sidney is made up of 12.5 square miles. According to the 2010 census, we had 21,229 residents, 197 full-time city employees. However, we have a budget for 226 full-time equivalents due to the part-time employees we have. Most of those are seasonals in the Parks Department and our Shelby Transit, which we run in conjunction with Shelby County. Our operating budget is just a smidge over 30 million. Our capital budget is just under 9.7 million. And we have a debt service budget of 4.14 million. And that's primarily, we're about to pay off when they built the police station, but with the development of the water source out in Washington Township, we bonded for that, and that's the biggest chunk of that money. And Ginger's probably going to go into more detail on that. So we do have a AA, Standard & Poor's AA bond rating, which we were able to maintain all the way through the recession and through the pandemic. So we have very strong financial policies. I'm sure Ginger's going to talk about that as well. But we're very fortunate to have a strong fiscal policies that councils have followed for 40 plus years, I believe. So. This is a little hard to see. It's an organizational chart. It's an organizational chart. I apologize for turning my back to you. But as you can see, the citizen, I'll get into this when we talk about the form of government, but it's really modeled after a publicly traded corporation. Instead of stockholders, we have the citizens of Sidney. Of course, the stockholders elect a board of directors, citizens elect city council, and then the board of directors hire a CEO, and the council hires a city manager. Council has 3 appointments. It's the city manager, the law director, and the city clerk. There are 6 major departments: parks, finance, public works, community development, fire, and police, And then we also have the human resource function, which currently they report directly to the city manager. So I do the presentation for leadership, Sidney, and I like to say we're the most diversified corporation in the county with, parks, quality of life, finances and administration. Public works is environmental with the water and sewer and solid waste. There are also transportation with streets, fleet, and the Shelby Public Transit. I consider community development part of the quality of life because they do a lot of the dirty work to help keep the city clean and attractive. And then, of course, fire and police are public safety. So it's a very, I say, we provide all those services because the private sector couldn't do it and make a profit. I mean, we exist because those are the services our citizens want. And there's just not, the private sector is not going to do it, quite frankly. So in Ohio, there are two forms of local government. There's what's known as a charter form, which is what we're under, and then there's a statutory form, which you follow state law. All our villages are statutory or strong mayor. The largest city in this region that's a statutory city would be the city of Troy. And I work for city of Troy, and I'm pretty sure the reason they haven't went to a manager form is because Piqua has one. But they run that. Troy runs the city. They're public. They're director of public service and safety for all purposes as a city manager. The difference is he reports directly to the mayor, not to council. So, well, here we go. And here's the main differences. Once again, the biggest difference is in the manager form, council manager form. Residents elect the council. Council appoints a city manager who then acts as the CEO of the city and hires, fires, and basically carries out the goals set up by city council. In the strong mayor form, the residents elect the council, but then they elect the mayor separately. And then the mayor is the one who is the chief executive officer in that form. Why the council manager form? As early as 1934, there was an organization called the Citizens and Taxpayers Nonpartisan League was promoting the council form of government for Sidney. Nationwide, it really started at the early 1900s and it was really driven a lot by the corporations and businesses because they wanted not to have to, people would be complaining, my street doesn't get plowed or my street doesn't get paved because I didn't support the mayor in the last election. So there was a lot of partisanship like that. So the corporation said, why don't we run this like a corporation? So, and actually if you've heard my leadership Sidney spiel, you'll know the answer to this, but does anybody know what the first large city in the United States to adopt the council manager form? It's really close. I bet you've all been there.
Columbus.
Nope, that's strong mayor. Dayton, Ohio. Now Dayton's a little different because they've got a city commission and they do have a directly elected mayor. So that's a little variation of the council manager form. We have what I call the pure form, where there's not a direct election mayor. You elect council, and the council then elects who the mayor and the vice mayor is. So, but in November 2nd, 1954, the city voters adopted the council manager form of government. Council's role in this form of government is to set strategic direction and policy. Every other year after the council elections, we have a council retreat. It didn't work out in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But after the election, we will be looking to have that retreat. Normally that happens March, April, And the idea, hopefully, those goals set, then we'll set up staff and we start to put together the budget for, in this case, 2022. Council approves and reviews and approves the budgets. They appoint, evaluate the city manager, law director, and clerk of council annually. They respect the city manager's areas of responsibility and authority, and they value the staff's technical expertise. Our senior staff has probably combined, I'm thinking, pretty close to 150 years of local government experience. So we're very blessed with a very strong staff. And I like to, the staff has a lane they drive in and the council has a lane they drive in. And sometimes you get in each other's lanes out of necessity, but, we try to respect and not get in each other's lanes too much. The mayor's role in the council manager form is he presides all meetings of council. He's the chair of council. He performs ceremonial functions, proclamations, ribbon cuttings, and serves as the team leader, facilitator of city council. If he's unable to fulfill some of these or he goes on vacation, then we have the vice mayor who's also elected by council, and they serve for 2-year terms. So every 2 years it's reorganized, and by the charter, the city charter, I think at the first meeting in December, that's when they have to, or they have that organizational meeting. So, I think Carrie's the only staff person in there. The rest of us kind of wait to see with the white smoke come out of the chimney. So. Oh, good. I thought that was a good picture of me right after it got taken. Again, the city manager is the CEO of the city. The responsibility of the manager is to hire, supervise, and terminate staff, implement and carry out the vision, goals, and policy of council, support the elected officials in their roles by providing thoughtful, well-prepared, and clear communication in a timely manner, oversees the daily operations of the city, and prepare and present budgets to the city council. Our budget process actually begins with what we call the 5-year plan, and that's a capital and operational budget. And I'm sure Ginger's going to talk about this as well, but it's over a 5-year period. We look not only at those major projects, bricks and mortar projects, fleet acquisitions, those types of things. We also look at operationally, if department heads want to make a request to add staff, obviously that has a cost impact over the 5 years of this budget. So the 5-year plan is done first. In fact, staff is preparing their budget request for the 5-year plan right now. So, so after the 5-year plan is adopted, then using that first year of the 5-year plan. So in this next year, it'll be the 2022 to 2027, 26 calendar year, laying out these projects. And we also include those projects requested, but after Ginger and I meet with everybody, go through and figure out what we have to spend, those become unfunded projects. But we still list them, keep them on the radar because they were important enough for the department head to put in. And it also gives council a look at what we didn't fund. And there's always that opportunity as we talk about this to make if you think that we need a new piece of fire apparatus that's going to cost $500,000, but we have that unfunded. If council really feels strong about that, they have to find $500,000 somewhere else that they can take off that capital list. So, and it's a lot of folks don't deal in their daily financials with that kind of magnitude of thoughts or decisions. So the staff's role, well, that's a lot of good looking people there. They provide the manager with technical perspective and expertise. The manager, most managers either came right out of MPA school, Master's of Public Administration, and got went as an assistant manager and then on to manager, or they started out as a in a department and worked up to a department head position, and then just good luck or bad luck, depending on how you look at it, they moved up. I myself started out in city planning as an entry level planner and worked in planning for just 10 years or so, and I was actually, this is my second time here in Sydney. I was able to move from the city planner to the community development director and then to the assistant city manager. So that's how I got into city management. But we're very, very blessed with the folks you see there. The only people that aren't in attendance, on the far left is the public works director, John Cruzy. John actually has 15 years city manager experience as well, and he's a Sydney native. And Fire Chief Chad Hollinger, then Police Chief Will Balling, and finally on the right is a Parks and Recreation Director, Dwayne Guy. All city managers, for the most part, belong to the International City County Management Association, or ICMA. And ICMA has a code of ethics that they all members of the ICMA have to adhere to. And this is somewhat sets that profession apart, because if you do something as a manager that's against the code of ethics, you can be publicly censored or privately censored by the organization, and in some severe cases, they basically bar you from membership in the organization. So I know one of the things I have framed on my wall is the code of ethics from the ICMA. And most of it's really common sense. I mean, don't take money. Don't. One of the big ones that get a lot of people in trouble is they run for elected office someplace else while they're a manager in another. They don't live in the community they manage, and that one gets that's a lot of the issues. And then unfortunately, things like sexual harassment, things like that happen and get managers in trouble. But the managers hold each other accountable, because that's where most of these, if there's a violation, you're obligated to contact, if you know about it, contact the ICMA, and they'll start the investigation process. So the city manager form, I got behind. It's 2/3 of all communities have received a AAA bond rating by Moody's or city or council manager form. And in a 2018 list of the top 50 best places to live, 72% are governed under this form. So it's been around here for a long time, and hopefully it'll be around for a long time after that. So I'm going to turn it over to Ginger to talk finance.
Hi, I'm Ginger Adams. I'm the finance officer. I started with the city in 2002. Prior to that, I had about 15 years experience in both public accounting and not-for-profit accounting. Okay. As Mark touched on, the city's comprehensive plan and the council goals provide the basis for city staff to prepare a 5-year operating and capital project plan. The purpose of the 5-year plan is to make conservative financial projections for all of our major operating as well as all of our capital funds to assure that funding will be there over a longer period of time, not just budgeting for the next year, but looking at it in a long-term perspective. Even though it's a 5-year plan, we update that annually. And once the 5-year plan is approved, then the basic strategies, the staffing, and the capital that's approved in the 5-year plan for that first year, that year one, moves into the annual budget and becomes the basis for that annual budget. And of course, as you see on to the left-hand side of this diagram, that all of this is done in accordance with our financial policies, which have been adopted by City Council. We stress the importance of the 5-year plan because, as you see in this chart, on average, 77 cents of every dollar is spent on staffing or capital, and those priorities are established during that 5-year planning process. Fund accounting. The city currently has 70 separate funds. A fund is a separate accounting entity, and it's designed to track both the revenue and the expenditures. For example, the city receives a portion of motor vehicle license fees and gasoline taxes from the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio, the state legislature, restricts how cities may use those fees and taxes. And so by having that all recorded in a separate fund, it enables us to demonstrate accountability and legal compliance and really transparency of how that revenue is being spent. This chart shows our 2021 budget by fund type. Sidney actually has 6 types of funds. The general fund is the main operating fund. It's what is used to pay for general government services such as police, fire, parks, code enforcement, community development, kind of those general governmental services. Next, we have special revenue funds. Those are like what I just mentioned. The street fund is a special revenue type of fund, and it tracks a separate source of revenue. One that you hear about a lot just very recently in the news is about CARES Act and CARES Act funding. That's a federal source of funds. It's required to be in a special revenue separate fund. The next type is capital project funds. They're used to track the purchase of either the purchase or construction of long-lived assets, streets, bridges, water lines, capital projects. Our enterprise funds are funds that are designed to be run as a business, and primarily those are our utility funds: water, sewer, stormwater. Internal service funds, those are actually funds that serve other city departments, and a really good example of that is our IT department. Every department is hooked up to the computers and the laptops and whatnot, and the expenses of that department then get charged out to all of the departments that use that particular function. Finally, we have a few fiduciary funds, and those are small funds that are holding funds on behalf of somebody else, another entity. We have several cemetery trust funds where people have bequested, left amounts from which we purchase certain flowers during a couple of the holidays during the year. I mentioned the general fund. That's our largest fund. It's our operating fund for general government services. This chart shows how it's broken down, how the expenditures are broken down by department. Based on our 2021 budget, the police department makes up the largest piece of the pie, or 33%, or about $6.3 million. Fire and EMS expenditures were budgeted at $5.3 million, or about 28% of the total. The expenditures budgeted for the Sidney Municipal Court totaled $1.6 million, or about 8%, with Parks and Recreation budgeted at $1.3 million. That other piece of the pie, the remaining 24%, that is all other departments. It's finance, community development, administration. It also includes subsidies that the general fund provides for other funds. Those subsidies include, like, for the airport, for Shelby Public Transit, for the swimming pool, Graceland Cemetery, where they provide some of the funding themselves, as an entity, as they function, but they can't pay for 100% of their costs. And so the general fund then subsidizes those funds. The Capital Improvement Fund, this is our largest fund from which the general capital projects are paid from, as opposed to the utility funds would have the water lines and the sewer lines. Capital Improvement Fund pays for the streets, bridges, the other governmental capital projects. Based on this last 5-year plan, 53% of the planned expenditures would be spent on street, traffic, and bridge projects. This Capital Improvement Fund is just its share of the 1.5% permanent income tax. There is a completely separate fund for that dedicated tax levy that is just for the street capital projects. My last slide is that there's a popular misconception that the city receives much of our funding from property taxes, and that is not the case. This pie chart shows how property taxes collected are distributed. The city of Sidney receives 7% of property taxes collected. Rather, our largest source of revenue is from income taxes. It's either income taxes collected when employers withhold Sidney income tax from their employees, or companies pay income tax based on their net profits. Our current income tax rate is, as you know, 1.65, and that dedicated street portion is in place until the end of 2023. With that, I know this is just really touches just the very basic of the Sidney, how our finances work. But I don't know if we answer questions now or at the end.
They'll have questions.
If you have any questions for me, or if you think about it.
No, we can have questions at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just, touch on just a couple other things. One is in that 5-year plan, the city goes after every and all grant opportunities we can, and you'll see that. We run a lot of programs through grants. Transit, for one, we get a lot of money from transit. Also for the airport, a lot of money through both the Ohio Department of Transportation airports and the FAA. So, and there's some public works grants out there as well. And we've also taken advantage of some very low interest loans for water and sewer plant operations. The other thing we do is we just don't, the budget's adopted and we sit back and don't monitor it. I mean, they do it a lot, but we also do what we call, it's a review we call rolling quarters. So after the first quarter, we'll sit down with all of the department heads and go through line item by line item of their budget and try to find out if they've spent 95% of the budget in the first 3 months. We need to know why. And conversely, when you get to the end of the third quarter, if they've spent 0 out of that fund, we need to know why. And if they're not going to spend it, then as finance trues everything up at the end of the year with one final supplemental appropriation, I guess talk about, well, the adopt the appropriations budget, then we have to make adjustments, and those are called supplemental appropriations. And as much as we'd like to have one a year, we need to have 2, because after we get year-end numbers, we usually have one in late January, early February, and then in November have the second one to true everything up. Doesn't happen. Priorities change, grants come in, we get donations of money, and so we just have to do that. So that will come back before council as well. But the rolling quarters is very important. It gives us an opportunity to find out where everybody's at. And if there is a problem, then we need to know we can get it on the supplemental list to take care of that. So,
One question.
yes, sir.
If the money is available, does the city try to spend that money because they have to spend it, or they can roll over to the next year because the other priority might come in? How do you manage this?
We do not spend it just because it's in the, you have it in your budget. And we've made that very clear to the department heads. We don't want to see a run on, somebody buying, 10,000 Post-it notes because they just want to spend the money. And our financial policies that Ginger talked about, they set minimum fund balances. So for the big funds, the major funds, those are all set at 20%. So we want to have 20% of the expenditures that are going to be left at least at the end of the year. If you're elected, and you could look at the budget now, it's online. The 5-year plan or the budget, you'll see in year 5 we get kind of close to 20%, but usually we've maintained 30 to 40% fund balances. And what that does is allowed us, best example is when the pandemic hit and a lot of our industry shut down and our income tax revenues went down, we were able to make changes, make cuts, or ask council to make cuts to maintain those fund balances. And that fund balance, and it's with our budget, it's close to what, 3-4 million at 20%. That's 62 days of operations, or 72.
72.
So that we could run the government 72 days if we didn't take any different actions. And that's why we have those fund balances there. It's just, and again, that's why we're a AA bond rating, which is important because when we do go out to borrow money, that saves us millions of dollars on interest over the lifetime of the loan. So now what promises to be perhaps the most exciting portion of this, bioethics, public records law, and open meetings act.
Hold your applause, Jim. Good evening. My name is Jeff Amick. I'm the city attorney, law director, and prosecuting attorney in community court. And as you can tell, I'm probably not a recent graduate of law school. Been serving here for the last 10 years, but before that, I served the city of Greenville as its elected law director in the statutory form of government for 30 plus years. I've been doing this kind of a gig for about 40 years plus. One thing I want to kind of illustrate or add to what Mark said in terms of the statutory versus the charter form of government before we get into the gist of what I'm supposed to be talking about is, if you think about the statutory form of government, it's like you're operating in a box, and that box is confined by what the Ohio laws, the Ohio Revised Code tells you you can do, with some variations and whatever, but pretty much constrained. But the charter form of government, which Sidney is, you can operate outside of that box. As long as you don't do things that are in violation of the general laws of Ohio that are supposed to apply to everybody who lives in the state, you can pretty much do that in the charter form of government. And the reason I bring that up is it's a challenge for you as the members of the city council to think outside of the box. Okay, it's real easy to go look at the Ohio Revised Code and say, well, this is how we're supposed to operate. But a charter form of government gives you some flexibility, gives you the opportunity to use the brain to be creative for your residents, much, much more so than in the statutory form. And so it's kind of neat and it's kind of exciting, and that's the kind of people that I think the people here in Sydney deserve, is those forward-thinking people who are out-of-the-box kind of thinkers. And that's what I see as being the great advantage of the charter form. Okay, that little advertisement having been said, I will get into my main portion, which is, as Mark said, ethics, public records, and open meetings. And basically, all of this involves one aspect, and that is the word I think Ginger used, which is transparency. You've heard that word over and over again, but that's what more and more and more we are being required as public servants to do, to act in a transparent manner so that not only all of us know what's going on, but all of them know what's going on, okay? And so when you become a member of this city council or a public servant in any aspect, you give up a little bit of your privacy. And I think Colin may talk a little bit about this, and I hope I'm not stealing your thunder too much, but at the very get-go, when you become a declared candidate, you have to start telling people a little bit about who the heck you are and what you owe, what you own, who owns a part of your life as well. Because in these financial disclosure forms, you have to give information, for example, about any income that you have, gifts that you might have been receiving or about to receive, all of your business affiliations, who your creditors might be, persons who owe you money, your investments, offices or positions that you hold with corporations or trusts, etc. And, to the extent that you are reimbursed for food and other things in your place of employment. So your life becomes a little bit like an open book. Now, that's not a tough thing to do, but you need to understand that because you are representing the public, you're controlling their daily lives to a certain degree and certainly controlling a big aspect of their monies. They want to know how you're going to be doing it. And that's why it segues into why we all have to conduct ourselves so ethically, morally, legally, those kind of things. Okay. Generally, when you talk about ethics, there are two things you have to be concerned about. One is whether or not you have any kind of conflict of interest, which may be apparent between your private life and your public life. And in that particular situation, these unlawful interests in public contracts, that's the biggest bugaboo as far as conflict of interest. And Ohio law basically says that if you are a public official, you cannot use your authority or influence to secure investments of public funds in any manner in which you as a public official, your family, or your business associates have an interest or make profit. And so it isn't just you, it's about your wife, it's about your son, your daughter, your brother, your partner. Again, it's exponentially kind of goes out there, and you have to make sure that you're not doing anything that benefits any of them simply by what you might do seated there. Number two, you can't use your influence to secure the award of a public contract to an entity in which you as the public official, your family, your associates have an interest. Okay, again, pretty common sense. The third one, and this is the one that gets people into a little bit of trouble sometimes, is during your term or within 1 year after your term, you can't occupy any position for profit with a company that the public entity had business with during the term, unless that contract was publicly and competitively bid. What does that mean? You can't go to work for the company that was supplying certain things to the city unless it was competitively bid. So you can't use your public knowledge to profit yourself even after you leave office. Okay. And just generally, you can't benefit from any public contract. Now, aside from those kind of things, which can get you in a lot of trouble, by the way, if you would violate any of that can, I believe it's a 4th-degree felony, so you can go to jail for up to 18 months if you do any of these things. And it's not anticipated that any of you would, but again, it's part of what I'm supposed to be talking about, so we're talking about it. But mostly, and more importantly, and the thing that, to be quite frank with you, each of you, if you become an elected official, will at some point in time face, and those are ethical considerations. And generally, mostly, that's about, can you accept anything from anybody who does any business with the city? So you're the next ward council member, and the guy who sells us our fire trucks says, you know what, I've got season tickets to the Buckeyes. How'd you like to have 4 season tickets for good seats, not C deck, they're A deck. Would you like to have those? The answer to that is yes. May you accept them? The answer is no. Okay. So, and this is what happens a lot of times, and it's not so overt as that, where somebody is giving you something that obviously is, worth a ton. Buckeye tickets, you can accept Michigan tickets because they're not worth anything. Any Michigan fans here? Good. So far we like it. Okay. The point of the matter being that there are going to be times though when as a public official you're going to be asked, well, I'd like to just take you out to dinner. I'm going to be in town here. I'm that fire truck salesman. How about we catch a drink and a burger over at the bridge? It's not a lot of money. Okay. Could you do it? Yeah. Should you do it? No. Why? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, that person may really be trying to kind of overtly influence your vote. But more importantly, and I think maybe not more importantly, but more, I guess, directly, somebody might be having dinner over at the bridge who sees you sitting there with this guy and forms a conclusion that's totally off base, but you don't want to create the impression that you're doing anything that's inappropriate. Okay? So, again, you have to make sure that you're not only are you legally pure, but you're ethically pure. And I always used to tell people, I know I've said this to Steve before, and I've told it probably all of the council members that have served over the years. If an issue comes up and the spider sense comes up, should I do this or not? The best advice anybody can give you is ask before you take. Okay? And generally the advice I give is, if you have to ask, don't take. Okay? Because if that spider sense goes up, it's not worth it for you to create even that impression. Even if technically it's okay, just by appearances it may not be. Mm-hmm. All right? All right. Enough of that stuff. Okay, public records law. Another aspect of this transparency, Mike, how's it?
Never litigate with a power.
Well, you will note I didn't give you any kind of handouts or put anything up here, right? Because that's one of the advice the lawyer gives is never to leave a paper. Okay, sorry. I can't get in front of people without goofing around a bit. Basically, another aspect of the transparency that I was talking about is about public records. And what this means is that you're going to be dealing with a lot of things that come your way, papers that describe what you're doing here in council, committee work, things that are coming before you for consideration. And generally, these records that you have, if they have to do with the city and if they document the workings of the city, are public records. So what do I mean by that? Why is that important? Well, let's say you go home and you take all of your papers that are related to your council work and the financials that Ginger might have given you, et cetera, and you throw them into the box that you keep under the desk that you get out every once in a while. Those are public documents. They may also be involved in that box may also be your will. It might be, the combination to the safe at your office. You don't want to keep your public documents in the same place that you keep your private documents, simply because if you intermingle them too much, it may be difficult to determine where the public aspect leaves off and the private starts. Okay. Now there are certain exceptions, and I'm just going to read these, but just to tell you that these are the things that aren't public records are subject to disclosure through the Ohio Public Records Law. And then to understand that pretty much everything else is. Trial preparation records, well, they don't apply to you. Confidential law enforcement records, personal information such as, maybe your social security number, those kind of things. Of course, that's not public record for a lot of reasons. Information relating to recreational activities of a person less than 18 years of age. Don't ask me because I don't know what that means. I don't know why that's there, but it's in the statute. HIPAA records or records that are not allowed to be given out because of HIPAA. Certain financial proprietary information of the city, which may have to do with the way we conduct our businesses on our computers, etc. And then certain information relating to public utility customers. But the bottom line basically is this. You can see those are all very specific things. Pretty much everything else that comes into your possession as a council member is a public record and may be subject to having somebody make a public records request, which says, we want you to give every record that you have related to this, that, and the other thing. Public record may very well be your emails, your voicemails, any kind of electronic information that you keep that's related to the city. And so, if somebody makes a public record request, not only do we have to provide it, we have to provide it very quickly, and we have to do it very thoroughly. Because if we don't, we want to play games with that somehow or whatever, not only do we maybe have an order that tells us to produce it, but we also have an order that says, pay somebody a penalty for not having complied with the public records law. Okay? What I want you to take from this mostly is this. You do have to maintain a very clear-cut dichotomy between your public life and your private life. You don't want to mix the two, not only because you have that box underneath your desk, but most importantly, where it does get people into some trouble is when they have one of these little dudes. And you're using this little dude to conduct not only, talking about your kids and what you're going to do on Saturday night, but you're also talking about, what's going on in your your public life and what you're doing on behalf of your constituents. Because when somebody asks for any record that you have that might produce or show how the city conducts its business, they're not going to let you go through and say, well, okay, I'll give you this email and we'll give you that email. Or they're going to say, give me your phone and let me decide whether it's a public record or not. Okay? So again, gotta make sure you keep that public, private stuff separate.
Would you recommend 2 phones?
Yes. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know, I defer maybe to Steve. I don't know that he's got 2 phones.
The thing is, I don't do email on my phone. And so if there's any city business that's conducted, it's usually by email. Therefore, I do not do it because I don't want to give over my private phone.
Mm-hmm.
I keep it separate. Plus, the city issues you a tablet that has all the information on it anyhow. So there's really, aside from convenience, there's no other reason to use your phone for city business.
But let me hop in and think about this though. Think about how many years ago it was, but all of the problems that Hillary Clinton had with her personal stuff. You would think somebody who'd been, the wife of the president, the secretary of state, and all these good things would have enough common sense to say, I'm not going to put my personal stuff or my public stuff on a personal phone. But it happens because it's convenient. You just, you do it and you don't think about it, but it can really get you into some trouble. Okay? The last aspect of this has to do with Ohio's open meetings law, or sometimes it's referred to as the sunshine laws. Effectively, what that means is that when public officials meet, those meetings, not in every instance, but in most instances, should be open to the public so that the public can, in fact, participate, hear what's going on, give opinions, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have a public meeting, there are requirements, and Carrie may talk about this, but those meetings have to be publicized so that the public does know that they're being conducted, where they're conducting it, and all that kind of stuff. And it isn't just up here on Monday evenings that you have a meeting. Okay, let's say that the three of you as new members, you're all three elected now, and one of you says, hey, let's get together over there at the bridge, and they pay me for this, by the way. And let's talk about how we can be the best doggone new members of this board or this council. And let's talk about where we're going. Well, that's a public meeting, gentlemen. Because anytime three or more of you meet together to discuss the business inherent to the city, you got to publicize it, and you got to let people come over and participate and be a part of it. You got to take notes. You got to have minutes. Okay. So, and you really, really, really shouldn't get around that by saying, okay, we'll not meet at the bridge. I'll call you at 9 o'clock. I'll call you at 10 o'clock. And, you know, you're the one who initiated all the calls. You know, if you're having a meeting, even if it's kind of a loose meeting like that, you need to be very careful how you do these things, because if not, you could be violating the sunshine laws. And again, that could end up in costing the city money, it can cost you money, and could very well mean that legislation or action taken by the city in these meetings that weren't conducted entirely correctly is void. It didn't happen. It was, you know, the day before is what it becomes. So you got to be very careful about how you do this. Now, there are some exceptions to the public meeting laws. And just very briefly and quickly, when you talk about the appointment or employment of a public official or employee, to consider the purchase or sale of public property, conferences with the city attorney about matters, you know, legal matters, preparing for contract negotiations, other matters which have to be kept secret, like, well, for example, like HIPAA type things again, matters related to the security arrangements of this building, you know, where the safe places are, et cetera, et cetera. And then economic development related issues. All of those you can discuss in a non-public setting. If you've ever been a part of any of the meetings here, you might hear that sometimes the council goes into executive session. Well, at those executive sessions, those kind of things can be discussed, but only those kind of things. And if you get into one of those discussions that they morph into something else, you know, the reason they went into that meeting was to talk about hiring or firing of a public employee, and then it morphs into, well, what about, are we going to pave Court Street this year? No, that has to stop. That can't be discussed in that private setting because it's something that the public has the right to participate. Okay. What else? When you get into these executive sessions, you're bound by secrecy. Secrecy in that, not because we're trying to play games, but because that which is said there in those executive sessions is intended to be only discussed there. So that means when you go home from the council meeting that night and your wife says to you, hey, honey, what happened tonight? Well, you can tell her up to the point of executive session, but you better not tell her anything that happened in executive session. And to explain to you how significant that is, there's 7 members of council. If one of those members of council was not able to be at that council meeting where there was an executive session discussed, that person can't even be told. The member of council can't even be told what happened in executive session because that stuff stays right here. Okay? I think that's all I can bore you with at this point.
I want to talk about our friends in Cincinnati who use their email and their text to violate the open meetings law.
Well, yeah, I have to look around here. basically, I'll not go specifically about this. The bottom line is this. Certainly there are ways to get around this as far as the meetings and you can't meet exclusively. They use text, they use telephone, they do all sorts of things. But in this day and age, folks, nothing that we do is private. Somewhere along the line, somebody's going to rat you out, or somebody's going to see one of those emails, or somebody. And when that happens, the most important thing is that when you do that, whatever results from that can be invalidated. And it also can cost the town a lot of money. Okay? I was involved, one more story, I was involved in representing a small village in Darke County years ago where these folks called me in after the fact where they had been sued for a boatload of money and for to recapture money that had been spent on a project that was not properly discussed, was action taken outside of a public meeting. But for the fact that they had a brilliant lawyer, the impact would have been much greater. They paid some money, but it wasn't the $1 million plus that had been asked for. And quite frankly, I was sweating bullets that they were going to have to pay that $1 million plus because they really did step on it pretty big. Okay, so again, you just got to be really, really careful what you do. Last but not least, and I did forget this, is before you put that petition in, before you file it with Colin and his folks, you need to consider whether or not your service on this council will be compatible with that which you do in your everyday life in terms of your job. Okay? There are, and I won't get into all of it because it really is complicated and takes up more time than you've got here. But there really are some jobs that are incompatible with service as a member of a city council. Okay? And sometimes it boils down to city council in a statutory city versus city council in a charter city. But if you have any kind of thought that maybe what I do might be incompatible with being that city council member, I really encourage you to do one of two things, perhaps two things completely. There is if you go to the website for the Ohio Attorney General and type in compatibility index, COMPATIBILITY index, something will pop up, and basically it's written in plain English, not legalese, that basically it's a flow chart. If you are a member of the village council, or you're employed as the village council finance officer, can you serve as a city council member in a charter city, or some such thing like that? So you can fairly easily find these situations and try to ferret them out. The second thing I would say is this: if you really do have what right now is a public office, okay, I would think it would be well worth your time and your effort to maybe employ the services of an attorney to look through that, because that's an index. It's a nice guide, but it doesn't take into consideration all of the decisions that have been made over the years about what jobs some people can hold and still have a public office. Okay, so I don't know what any of you do. But if there is any of that tinge of kind of spider feeling I was talking about before with regard to gifts, if you have any kind of thought process there, please check it out before you file, because what can happen is you can file, win the election, and then after the fact be put out of office because you're really not compatible. Okay?
What was the website again?
It's the Ohio Attorney General.
Attorney General.
And then it, as a subset in there, it's compatibility index.
One
Yes, sir.
previous question I
Yes,
have.
sir.
If somebody sues the city, whose money, that's the taxpayer money, right? But isn't that like we have $30 million, somebody sues for $25 million, we'll be bankrupt.
No.
How would that work?
It depends what they're suing for, okay? If it's, for example, let's put it to you this way. The city is involved in an insurance consortium. In this insurance consortium provides insurance coverage for just a whole host of things that the city does. And not only if we are sued, most of the time then, the defense for that suit is provided by our insurance people. And if there is a recovery, it's like, your car insurance, there's something there to help fund that loss. About the only thing, and Ginger, maybe you can answer this if I'm not doing it right, but about the only thing that isn't covered by that umbrella of insurance that we have is if I do something myself, as a public official, that is beyond the scope of what my apparent authority was, and I did it maybe in an illegal way. That I did something knowingly wrong that was misfeasance, malfeasance, or nonfeasance, then the citizen shouldn't have to pay because I'm a bad guy. Okay? But the general, one of our guys, God forbid, and I don't think it would ever happen, but gets involved in a situation like was out in Minnesota. Okay, there's insurance to cover that. That's not going to impact whether or not our roads are going to get fixed or the water is going to be available to drink or flush the toilets. Okay, does that answer what you're saying?
Yes.
And did I do that properly? Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, I have one more.
Yeah.
There's so many restrictions. I was just giving opportunity. If there is a restriction, when you cannot talk to other persons just for coffee or something, then it's very hard to make relationship and networks to learn something. I have a good idea. I'm a businessman. I want to talk to one of you folks, right? How would I talk then? It would be hard for me to give you an idea for the city, and I have nothing to, I don't have a bad intention. I have a good intention for the people, but then how would I approach you, right?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. First of all, if it's a good idea, then it's probably something that you ought to be talking about to everybody in the open anyhow. Because that way, you get that open communication and everybody's getting their juices flowing and we talk this thing out fully, okay? But it's not wrong if you call this gentleman up and say, what's your first name? Joe. Hey, Joe. I'm just thinking, am I stupid here by bringing this up? Do you think it's a good idea if maybe I talk to council about doing X, Y, Z? That's fine. That's not a public meeting, and you're not plotting the strategy of the city. You're asking a very legitimate question. But if you're getting all three of you together to say, here's what I want to do, and I think if we talk to Wagner, we can get this thing done. And I think if we cut off, buying a new fire truck this year, we can do it. No, you can't do that because now you're conducting the general business of that city in a way that the public doesn't get a chance to participate. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. I think the best thing also, it is really good when there is there is two politics. One is gas and one is renewable, battery. So both sit together and then you guys sit and then discuss. Then there is no bipartisan thing, right?
Right. And
that really helps. But there is only a gas or battery sitting with them. Then it's like, okay, you are influencing. Like, okay.
Exactly. You're trying to affect an outcome without that outcome being discussed publicly. That's a very good example. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So we were talking about the compatibility index.
Yes, sir.
So is city council seat considered partisan or nonpartisan?
It's nonpartisan.
Okay, that's.
And that there is a distinction in that compatibility in certain things between partisan and nonpartisan. Yes.
That was because, that was a question for a place that I'm employed at, and I talked to my employer, and the way he says that the county looks at it is as long as it is nonpartisan. And that's kind of what I'm reading on the state's attorney website.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to pick on you. Yeah, that's important because before you invest anything, whether it's the first dime.
And I actually have sought out legal counsel, so.
Excellent. Yeah. One last thing, I promise, last thing. You asked partisan, whatever. The council that's up there right now, you know, if you come on to this council, you're going to have some big boots to fill because every one of these people, and I'm not saying it just because Steve's here, every one of these people are professional, they're prepared, they're thorough, they're everything that you'd want to see in a public official. Okay? And I couldn't tell you what political party any one of those people belongs to. And I've been doing this for 10 years. I haven't the foggiest idea. And that's because they don't bring any of that stuff here. What they bring here is this city, its best interest, and that's it. That's the bottom line. And that's where, you know, gas and batteries.
I mean, that is the good thing about this city, but other cities, you can directly know by talking.
Amen, my friend, because I came from a city like that. Okay? All right. Enough said.
Before you leave, you've got one more slide. Campaigning using social media.
Oh, I didn't know I was doing that.
Okay. Well, it's becoming more and more prevalent. I worked in a community about 12 years ago. We had somebody run for council, never showed up for any of the debates or anything, did everything through Facebook. He finished third in a 3-horse race, but you know, now maybe that's people do that.
Well, okay, yeah, actually, I'm reading this in real time along with you guys. Sorry, Carrie, I know you sent this out to me, but, you know, I was busy doing crosswords or something. The bottom line is that under this best practices, if you see that, do not identify yourself as a public official on your private or social media. Because again, when you start doing that, you're inviting people in to talk to you in your capacity as that public official. And what is that? Well, that might be a public record, might it not? And you need to direct individuals who wish to conduct business with you to do so, you know, publicly at a meeting or through proper staff. And that's another thing. You know, if people contact you, what your best interest is to contact the relevant, the city manager, for example, and say, look, I just got a call from my neighbor who's complaining about thus and so. You shouldn't take it upon yourself to do that thus and so. You talk to the city manager who can then parse it out to those people who can handle it. Again, this all kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Anything that you do when you're campaigning or whatever could in fact become a public record, could in fact make what you are trying to keep private a public matter, and you just don't want to see that done. Okay? All right. Am I done now, Coach?
Take the showers. Next on the hit parade is our local zoning laws regarding where you can and cannot put campaign signs. And so Barbara Dahlworth's going to make that presentation.
Hi there, I'm Barbara Dahlworth. I'm the Community Development Director. Well, pretty much everybody knows exactly what the fire department does, what the police department does. You may not know exactly what the Community Development Department does. It encompasses building inspection, building permits, code enforcement for property maintenance, planning and zoning, economic and community development, and various other projects as they come up. So, zoning law has sections on signs. So we're going to talk about signs. If you plan on running for office or you're volunteering on another candidate's campaign, you need to pay attention to where political signs go. They are not allowed in the right of way. They're allowed on private property. Signs cannot be placed on utility poles, utility boxes, telephone poles, etc. If you're not familiar with where the right-of-way is, if there is a sidewalk, which most of the city does have sidewalks, the
the right-of-way line is 1 foot behind the sidewalk. So the right-of-way encompasses the street and the grass area and sidewalk to 1 foot behind that. So that's where signs cannot be placed. They can be placed on private property with the permission of the property owner or person in charge and custody of that property. So this is a photo that shows a graphic of what is the right-of-way, the red line, the red arrows. The white area is where signs can be placed. Few areas in the city don't have sidewalks, so if there's no sidewalk, you're not sure where the right-of-way is, the best thing to do is look for markers, utility poles, fire hydrants, items like that. Generally, if you put the sign behind those utility poles, fire hydrants, etc., you're okay. You're outside of the right-of-way. If you put the signs between them and the curb, you're probably in the right-of-way. And this actually is an aerial photo of obviously a more rural area, but this gives you a pretty good graphic of what it looks like when you don't have sidewalks. And these are just some other pictures showing what it looks like when you don't have sidewalks. That can get really confusing for people. And also, we're always happy to help figure out where rights of way are. If you put your signs in the right of way, staff will remove them. If the signs are removed, they're taken out to the service center, which is on South Vandermark Road, and they can be picked up there by calling and making those arrangements. After a certain amount of time, and depending on how much storage we have available, they are thrown away. That's all I have. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you.
How many signs we can put?
As many as you can afford to make.
And there's no size limitation.
No size limitation as long as it doesn't disrupt the safety of traffic and cause a vision impairment.
And there's no, back in the day, a lot of ordinance said you can put it on 30 days before the election. It had to be down within a week after the election.
There are no time limits.
Yeah, that's went by the wayside as well.
As long as the signs remain in good repair, if they become damaged, shabby, falling apart, they're immediately trashed.
And where we have a lot of troubles is if there's a primary. Typically, the people who don't win the primary, they don't take the effort to come. So we end up pulling all their signs out for them. The other thing is there's a lot of city parkland that people might think would be a good place to put these signs. That's nothing on public property. So we'll get those as well. So now Clerk Egbert is going to talk about those resources out there to help you.
Yes. So my name is Carrie Egbert, and I have been in local government now for about 27 years. They've been here since 2014, and it is my job to make sure you all look good and that we herd you in the right direction, or we attempt to herd you in the right direction. Ask Mr. Wagner. I have been known to tell him no. So we've thrown a lot of stuff at you guys tonight, and we're not finished yet because we've saved the best for last, and because everybody has all the questions about how do I fill out my petitions and candidate finance. But there are resources available to candidates, and probably the easiest one to get to is our website. From there is a place up in the right-hand corner. It says sign in. And you can create an account on there, and you can subscribe to news, you can subscribe to the events, there's a number of different services. We even have alerts for traffic changes. Then you can subscribe either email or text message to get those, to kind of keep you in the loop of what's happening. The other one is from this page. If you click on government and then click on agendas and minutes, it will bring you to this page. And if you are planning to run for council, I would suggest that you also create an account on this page. because this page contains a folder for the agenda packets, and you can subscribe to just that folder. So you will get the exact same information that is provided to City Council every week prior to their meetings, and you can follow along with the meeting, and you will see exactly what it is they see. And the other thing, we do like to encourage anybody who is planning to run for City Council to begin attending meetings. Right now, we're kind of in a strange area of this COVID-19. So we are still doing a hybrid where our council members meet in person. Members of the public can participate via GoToMeeting. So part of the purpose for you providing your email address tonight was so that I can begin sending you a link, at least for the next 3 meetings, so you can listen into the council meetings and follow along. Beginning July 1, we will return to a full in-person format. So public participation, we encourage you to fill our seats. Council loves to have people in the audience. They especially like Boy Scouts and people that they can embarrass. But workshop, we have 2 different kinds of meetings. We have a workshop meeting, and that meeting is held the first Monday of every month. And that's a little bit different than the regular meeting. During the workshop meeting, this is council's opportunity to work. So there is no public participation in these meetings, but you can sit in the room and follow along and get a feel for what's going on. They just don't solicit public input on those topics. And the other thing about a workshop is they can't take action, so they cannot vote. About the only thing they can vote on during a workshop meeting is whether to excuse a council member or to go into executive session and, of course, to adjourn. But where the meat of things happen are in the regular meetings, and those are held the 2nd and 4th Mondays. That's where council can take action so they can vote. They solicit public input. You can come in, and there's actually a section on the agenda every week when we have a meeting that's for items that are not on the agenda. You'll get kind of used to the flow of the meeting. If there's an item on the agenda that you want to talk about, the mayor will ask at that point in time, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this topic? And that's your opportunity to provide input on that particular piece of legislation or that particular topic. If you have something you want to talk to them about that is not on the agenda, say you want to talk about, well, why does the traffic light at Russell and Wapak always flash on yellow? You can come to a public meeting and there's a public comments section. Feel free to get up and say what's on your mind. And then we do have a third kind of meeting, which is a special meeting, and those are only called periodically, and they can only be, the only items that can be considered are what's on the agenda. So if we have a special meeting and the special meeting is to appoint the newest council member, that's all we can do. There's no amending the agenda to go into executive session. There's no talking about that crazy street light. It's just what's on that particular agenda. Now, so you get elected, you're all excited, what to expect, right? I think Mark touched on it. We do have an orientation program where we will send you out into the field with all the members of the senior management team individually so you can learn more about those individual departments. You can expect that will take about 10 hours time to go through everything. Obviously, the bigger ones are public works and utilities and parks. Some of the other ones will only take about a half an hour. And quite honestly, to be fully engaged, you need to think of this as a part-time job where you're going to spend between 6, 8, 10 hours a week. Sometimes our council packets are 50 pages long. Sometimes they're 250 pages long. So there is some preparation for the meeting so that you come prepared to talk about and ask questions during the meeting. There's also things like attending ribbon cuttings and getting your picture in the newspaper and all that fun stuff. And of course, there's going to be the phone calls. They're going to call you. They're going to ask questions. So you listen to them, refer them, and then call the city manager with whatever complaint, concern it is, and we'll get staff to address whatever. But the big thing is never make promises that you can't keep yourself. So it's a learning curve, believe me. Everybody has been there, and at the end you will get through every meeting seamlessly. It will be fabulous. Next thing you know, you'll be making motions. It's all good. But if you decide, whoa, what am I getting myself into here? We do have over 20 different boards and commissions. Some of them are more active than others. At your seat, you'll see volunteer forms and a brochure that outlines those 20 different boards. We have 80 plus different community members that are making a difference, not making legislation like council does, but they are making recommendations on things as far as zoning, planning, trees, parks and recreation. So you name airport, you name it. If there's something that interests you, there's probably a board and commission. If you decide, yeah, maybe city council's not for me, start small, work your way up. We've had, actually we have a current council member who was on the planning commission for a number of years. So there's plenty for you to choose from if you decide that you don't want to be a council member. Now, we've saved the best for last.
Thank you. Yeah. Last for all, huh? Good evening. I am Colin Claywell, Deputy Director at the Shelby County Board of Elections here on Court Street.
Put yours
Oh,
up. How about that?
super. That'll help. Yeah, that'll work.
Now you can arrow down, I believe.
Arrow down.
There we go.
All right, it works. Okay. So I passed around basically the packet. Everything that you have is what is displayed here on the screen. But I've been with Shelby County Board of Elections since June 1st, and I've had numerous years running campaigns, managing campaigns, supporting candidates myself. It's a pleasure to be here in Shelby County. Before I was here, I was at the Montgomery County Board of Elections as well. So basically today, I'm going to run through with you how to first get access to the ballot. Once you're on the ballot, what to do, and then post-election cycle, talk a little bit about that. So yes, it seems like, again, we're going to throw a lot more at you just in this final stage of the presentation, but please don't make it to be intimidating. Everything that we do and we provide to you is a resource to assist you every step of the way. Okay, so feel free to ask questions as we go on, because there's some lofty things that we're going to discuss in terms of campaign finance, petition requirements, filing fees, etc. All right. So the first slide up here tells us the election information. So when's the big day? Mark your calendars, Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021 this year. All right. That does not include the early voting schedule that runs up 30 days before the election. So we will discuss that towards the end of the slideshow that I've got for you today. But you're going to share the ballot, all right? The City of Sidney will share the ballot, possibly with some issues that can be presented, all right? If the city determines that they want to put on a levy for something, or if the local school boards of education, they're going to run their candidates as well. But you've also got, other township trustees and things of that nature that will be presented on the ballot. So do keep in mind that it's not just you and your opponents on the ballot. There will be a whole array of candidates presented on the ballot for this November, as it is a 35 precinct countywide open election. So going on to the next slide here, the City of Sidney, all right, has its own charter home rule. What does a charter home rule really mean? What it means is the structure of their council, their terms of council, how they organize may differ from what statute dictates in the Ohio Revised Code, which is basically what the Board of Elections sets up most of our offices, their expectations for petitions, filing fees, requirements, etc., for their candidates to elected office. And there are some variances from, what the City of Sidney has for their council offices from what other village offices may have, all right, because of this charter. So the very first thing that I really want to point out is that this charter can be accessed online. I pulled it up, made sure I had all my, my facts straight in terms of, what the charter includes. And it can be accessed all online to the public. Anyone can get it. That's the link there. Feel free to ask, of course, Carrie, just to provide you the link would probably be the best thing for you to access. But the very first thing there, and I think many we've discussed it already. Many understand that the office is a nonpartisan office, okay? The ballots used in the elections for the city of Sidney, it dictates, shall be without party affiliation on the ballot. All right, you file as a nonpartisan candidate. You were not in the partisan primary election this last May. All right, so you are a nonpartisan candidate just in November. All right, so moving on to the next slide here is your term of council. So the term commencing and expiration dates are also subject to the Sidney's charter rules. They differ from state statute, Ohio Revised Code. All right, so it's important to remember that yes, you are elected to a 4-year term, and that term will commence on December 1st. All right, and then it will end November 30th. All right, 4 years from that December 1st date. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's when you start. That's when you got to run again. Okay. Moving on to the steps to ballot access. All right, tried to simplify this in a 5-step, all right, fashion. The very first thing you need to do is pick up your filing forms. All right, what the filing forms are available, I have for you, is the nominating petition, the petition instructions, as well as, I got it somewhere in here, the checklist that you have available at your seats there, okay? So those are the 3 things you want to make sure that you have access to get your campaign started, all right? Those instructions are very helpful on these colored sheets, very helpful. This is really what's going to guide you to successfully filing a valid nominating petition to run for office, all right? The second thing is that we really recommend that you check out is the 2021 Ohio Candidate Requirement Guide. This is online at the Secretary of State's office. I'm not asking you to read the whole thing, dissect the whole thing, highlight the whole thing. You can if you want. I know that I do. All right, so you as a candidate are responsible, all right, for setting up your campaign and doing it within the legal confines as dictated within the Ohio Revised Code as well as the local charter. All right, so familiarize yourself with these things. All right, the third thing is on your petition form, you want to make sure that you fill out the top 2 portions on the very front page, where it's statement of candidacy and the nominating petition. Before you ever circulate yourself, before anybody circulates for you, you want to make sure that you get this portion filled out. Because I will mention to you that if you do not fill out the first portion, all right, that can invalidate your petition. Any portion not filled out can invalidate your petition, but if the date's wrong, it can invalidate your petition and your own. Okay? So keep that in mind. So always, dot your I's and everything. Okay? The 4th step is you collect your petition signatures. And once you finish what we call a part petition, just keep this in mind. You'll need more than just one of these to be a valid candidate for office. And we'll go into what the minimum petition requirements are for signatures. Every time one of these, front and back, is filled out, you need to have what we call the circulator fill out this bottom portion. All right, it's called the circulator statement. It's above the certificate of validity. That's just for the Shelby County Board of Elections office. We handle the very bottom portion on the reverse side. Okay, your circulator is the person who goes around and collects the signatures for you. All right, and just as to give you some peace of mind, again, it's a nonpartisan office, so you can have any what we call qualified elector sign your petition regardless of their registered political party affiliation. All right, so it's very helpful for everyone within this room. All right, but the 5th step here is once you filled out all of your portions on your nominating petition is to file those with the Board of Elections by the filing deadline. All right, I've got the deadline later in the presentation, but one thing I really want to point out is in this gray box in the right-hand corner, All right, the filing deadline is 4 p.m. on Wednesday, August 4th, 2021. That's coming up, folks, okay? If it's 4:01 p.m., the door's locked, and we can't count your petition, okay? All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to qualified electors. So a qualified elector is the language, the legalese language, all right, of the individuals that sign your nominating petition. The qualified elector are only registered voters, and they're only registered voters within the jurisdiction for which you are running for office. Okay, your charter outlines that we just have ward candidates, right, on the ballot for this November. All right, but I've got at-large on here as reference if someone wants to run for at-large within 2 years. All right, but we're going to focus on the ward candidates. So if you live within the first ward and you've got someone that you're talking to that you're running for city council who lives in the third ward, you want to understand that that person, should they sign, is not a qualified elector on your nominating petition, and their signature will be invalidated. Keep that in mind. So some very good tips that I recommend that you do that we have readily available by public request are walking lists by precinct, and the precincts are by wards. So feel free to access those if you want to be able to get a list of qualified electors within your ward. Okay? So are there any questions before I move on real quick? Because we're going to talk in the nitty gritty about actually circulating the petitions and getting the signatures on paper.
The walking list, is that pulled from the website then?
It can be, yes. We do have it accessible on our county Board of Elections, yeah. But I recommend you just give us a call and we'll send it to you. How about that?
Is this all manual, or we can go online and fill it up?
Yeah, you can filter out by different voters on our website.
You can go online and fill online and submit online, or it's just like?
Oh, no, they have to hand you
with the paper.
Right, yes. I'm sorry, I was focused on the walking list portion. Okay. Any other questions on that regard? So when you do circulate your petitions, here's some helpful hints to remember. All right. Every qualified elector's signature, their address, their ward, and their precinct must match what we have on file for their voter registration at the Board of Elections. Okay? So you want to make sure they get their signature as legal as possible. You want to make sure they get the exact address that they voted with and their most recent election. You want to make sure that's all up to date, because if there's any discrepancy, we by law have to invalidate that qualified elector. Okay? You want to make sure they're also registered to vote. So that's another key as to why you have a walking list, because we only have walking lists for registered voters. Okay? Now remember that a P.O. box also does not qualify as the qualified elector's voter registration address. We have invalidated signatures in the past because of this. It may be on a mailing address that was sent with your walking list for you to send out mailers if you want, for instance, but that's not their registration address, because no one can register with a P.O. box to vote. Okay? Minimum number of signatures. All right. Again, I'm going to point out the gray box on the right-hand side on your colored petition instruction sheet. Beneath the deadline is the minimum number of signatures of office that you seek. All right. The ward candidates, the minimum number is 50. And when I say minimum, I mean minimum. We do recommend that you get up to 3 times the amount. All right, so 50 times 3 is 150, 125. I was like, oh my. Yeah, counting ballots, huh? So 150 signatures, all right, is really what we recommend that you get.
But required is only 50.
Required is only 50, but keep in mind, if you get 50 and one of those is invalidated, your entire petition is invalidated. Okay? Good question. So some common mistakes that you really need to try and avoid and could result in the invalidation of your part petition, any part petition, all right, is either the signature or the address, again, does not match or substantially conform is the rule. It does not substantially conform. So signatures change throughout the years. We understand that. But it needs to substantially conform to what they've signed for their voter registration. And that may be what they signed at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Okay, so if a voter asks, well, what sort of signature do you need? That's something that you can recommend that they sign with. It is their voter registration signature, okay? Now the statement of candidacy, the nominating petition or circulator statement portions are also not filled out correctly. So you have the wrong date of the election. You have the wrong commencing term. You have the wrong expiration term. Okay, you want to keep this in mind in the ward. All right, if we've got Naveen who's running for 3rd ward and he lives in 4th ward, okay, we have to invalidate that entire petition. Okay, keep that in mind. Also, do not count the qualified elector signatures that you're asked to present and write down in the circulator statement on the reverse side. Do not count by lines. There have been candidates that file part petitions where their voters, their qualified electors, have skipped the line and went down next. They would count the lines. They need to count the signature, the street number. All right, one signature, all right, is what they asked for by signature. Okay, the number of signatures is what you need to report, not the number of lines that were written for rows. The minimum required signatures also may not be attained or considered invalid. I discussed this. If you get 50 signatures, the bare minimum, and you only have 49 valid, your whole petition, your whole candidacy goes out the window, right? So very strict rules, I understand, but again, we're giving you the resources to try and avoid that. Yes, sir.
Signature is your full name or your actual, I don't write my full name as a signature. I have a different thing.
Yes.
So is that the signature? They don't have to write their full name?
They need to write the name that they're registered to vote with is our best advice in that regard. We do not allow nicknames, for instance. Okay, so they need to write Naveen Mandel, all right, if that's what you're registered as.
As based on the ID, right?
Based on what they're registered to vote with. Yes. So if you have someone that registers to vote as Robert Newell, all right, and he signs as Bob Newell, we don't accept that based on it's a nickname. Okay, and that is listed on your petition instructions here.
Here, they don't have a signature column. That's what I was asking.
I'm sorry?
There is a signature, but this should be a name, full name, and then there is not a signature column where they would sign.
The signature column is the second column. Do you see that? And then the first column is the line number. Do you see that signature?
Yeah, I got it, but okay, I'm just giving an example. My full name, where I would write Naveen Kumar Mandel, right? And then I would signature. So.
Oh, are you talking like printing your name?
Yeah,
right.
My name and then a signature. So.
You at least need to get the signature. We do recommend that you do print a full name if you have room. That's the problem is this is the form that we have.
Because if I do a signature, like if I would do a signature, you would not even know it's me because I have a signature like that.
We would know it's you based on your address.
Yes, based on my address, you would know.
Yes.
But at least, I can copy the signature stuff, but still we need to print the name. There should be a print the name, signature, and then that maybe next time.
I get it. Yeah, it's how the forms are set up, and it's honestly how the Secretary of State's forms are set up. So we don't have control over, manipulating how the form's set up.
As it is in my voter list.
Yes, just as it is on voter registration, signed just that way. Yeah. That is a big recommendation. It helps us process it quicker too. Okay. So are there any other questions before we move on? Cool. Okay. So the completion of your petition forms. You've got to remember, okay, you may have someone collecting petitions. All right, on the reverse side is, again, your circulator statement. They need to fill out the circulator statement. They sign the circulator statement. All right, you may want to help them fill it out. All right, but they need to sign, all right, and bear the number of signatures on the line that's provided when it asks containing number of signatures. That's for the circulator to do personally. All right. So after they fill that out and it's complete, you can return your nominating petitions. We honestly prefer you do it in person, all right, for ease of process, but you technically can return it by mail. And the filing fee is also $45. This applies for both at-large and ward council candidates. So when you go to turn in your nominating petitions, you need to be able to present us with either a cash or check. All right, and that check needs to be payable to the Shelby County, Ohio Board of Elections. All right. So important dates to kind of remember. Again, you've got the filing deadline. It's clear right there in bold print. All right, remember 4:01, door is locked. All right, we're closed for business. There's other two dates that are anticipated. All right, and when I say anticipated, there's pending election law that's in the legislature at this time that may change these dates, and we're not sure how that may be affected. Regardless, we never have our early voting schedule until the Secretary of State issues a policy directive outlining exactly what that is. Because it changes between presidential elections, local elections, you name it, you know. So we will update you based on what we have on our website that is, again, publicly accessible. All right, for you to know when the early voting, and it includes absentee and in-person mail, all right, that schedule is all the same. And we issue it all on one notice so that it's convenient for you to understand and distribute to your voters so you can campaign with it, okay? But again, that anticipated voter registration deadline is usually 30 days just before Election Day. We anticipate that to be Monday, October 4th, and we're open until 9 p.m. that night. So if you have someone who needs to register to vote to support you, you can have them come in at 8:59, fill out a form. We can get them registered to vote within the next day so that they can vote in the election. All right? And that's when we anticipate early voting to start, which it typically does the next day after voter registration deadline closes. And that's Tuesday, October 5th. So moving on here, folks, are the campaign finance committees. Actually, before I get there, I do want to go back to the candidate petition instructions. All right, some things that were not on the presentation I really want to focus on is, again, within the ward that you're running for, your qualified elector needs to live with them. They need to reside and be registered with them. Okay, the voter signature also needs to be in ink and in cursive writing. On the sidebar here, it does recommend that if their voter's name or address is illegible, to please print that voter's name and address. And you are able to do that for them, but they need to sign for themselves. All right. Another thing to keep in mind is to witness each and every signature so that no one else signs another qualified elector's name for them. All right. You also need to understand, very important, that the signature of any candidate or circulator appearing on the list of signers on any part petition will be deducted from the total number of names. All right. So you cannot sign your own nominating petition. The circulator cannot sign their own nominating petition that they're circulating for you, the candidate. Okay. One other thing I want to.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
They
go ahead.
can sign one that you have.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They just cannot sign the one they are attesting to.
That's correct. Yes, yes. Sure, yeah. So if Joe, right? If Joe is running for 3rd Ward and you live within the 3rd Ward and registered to vote, but you're circulating for him, you cannot sign.
Means helping, volunteering.
Correct. Yeah. So you cannot sign what you are already circulating. All right. You would have to sign another volunteers or circulators or his own, nominating petition. Does that make sense? Yeah. You can't sign what you're already passing around if you're the circulator. All right. Another one thing I really want to talk about is the candidate cannot sign their own petition as a voter and then file a second petition for the same office. So if your first filing is invalid, all right, that's when you cannot do this circumstance, okay? You can't sign it and file the second petition. All right. So one other critical thing is make sure your circulators have this with them. If you want multiple of these, we will gladly give them to you. All right. So, and make sure you go through it with them and that they fully understand.
Now, on the petition form, since there's a lot of information that needs filled out towards the top that's going to be standard on all of them,
Mm-hmm.
is it something you can fill out and photocopy this except for the signature part and then sign those
Yes, you can.
individually?
Yes, you can. Mm-hmm.
So that way, that reduces the likelihood of.
Right, that is acceptable. You can make your own copies.
Okay.
That's fine. You just need to make sure that all your signatures are on ink as well as any portion is signed off with a black ink wet signature.
Mhm.
Good questions, guys. I like it.
Only black ink.
It's hot up here.
Is it like full
Yes.
black ink or blue or also?
It just needs to be in ink. Okay, I recommend black ink. Keep it consistent. All right, but we would accept blue, black, red. That's fine. Mm-hmm. So yes, campaign finance committees. This is something that's very important that we really need to get you to understand. Before raising or spending any funds, you do need to open a campaign committee, all right, for your run for council. What this is called is a designation of treasurer. So you need to designate someone you trust that could file campaign finance reports on a later date, or that includes your contributions and your expenses made, as well as some other things we can discuss. But you need to make sure that you designate a treasurer before you even raise or even spend any money. And some of you may not. Oftentimes I've realized that they do not, but there are those. And it's just very smart that you do. Okay? So keep that in mind. And the biggest resources, the best resource for you to access is the Ohio Campaign Finance Handbook. Chapter 2 outlines everything for candidates that you as a candidate needs to know. And again, this can be accessed online at the Secretary of State's website. And if you really don't want to print it off, but you want a copy of it, feel free to come down. We'll print off copies for you just like anything else. No problem. So what this designation of treasurer form does, all right, it opens up your committee to where you can start receiving contributions, make deposits, all right, make expenses. You can accept donations of signs. It allows you to have all that available because you got to remember you're operating within the confines of the ORC and your charter rules here. All right, this is ORC here, this is state. All right, and again, this is all for transparency. All right, so I noticed that's a key word this evening. So it's all for transparency, so your voters know what you're doing and what's coming in and what's going out. All right.
How much you can spend your own money?
I'm sorry.
Like how much you can spend your own money on your?
Oh, how much can you spend? You can spend as much as you want. Right. Yeah. But you do need to disclose that you made your own contribution on that. All right. And then, again, that's all outlined in that campaign finance handbook. To me, it's very clear. It's not in legalese. It does include references and footnotes. with revised code references for you to look at if you want to digest it further. For instance, you're going to be dealing with legislation all the time should you enter office. So it's really good to get familiar with this handbook. All right. And consult a lawyer if you really need to help you with it. But basically, you also need to establish, if you plan on receiving contributions and making expenses, you need to make sure that you establish a bank account that's separate from your own personal or your business accounts. Very important. You do not want to collude the two. And all these monetary campaign contributions must be deposited into the account and disclosed on your reports that you as a candidate will have to file at later times. But I will let you know, if you have nothing to report, you do not need to file a report. But if you did have contributions and make expenses, yes, you do. All right.
Even if you spent your own money.
Even if you spend your own money, yes. So moving on to the next slide here, let's talk contributions. What's coming in? All right, county or local candidates are not limited in the amount of contributions that they may receive. You can raise $1 million for the big old city of Sidney Council race, all right? But, it is limited based on what contributions you can receive in cash. That's a full $100 from any individual within a single election cycle. So if you run and you receive $100 in cash from one person, that's all you can receive in cash. You need to report it. That's all you can receive in cash from that individual for this election. When you run for re-election, all right, you can get another $100 in cash. Does that make sense in terms of the contribution limit for cash? Okay. So again, candidates may also donate items or money to their own campaign committees. All right. And corporations, remember this, very important, are strictly prohibited from donating actively towards any candidate on the ballot. So how do you file campaign finance for forms? I don't want to get too much into this because most people really don't for running for city council. The mayor does though, because he makes over a certain amount and, has more contributions, expenses, etc. But you can either report those in person or you can file online. You can even open up your candidates committee and designate a treasurer online. And this is as of January 2021. I really encourage you to try that out because it's just very easy process. You get your login, you get your credentials for you and your treasurer. And I recommend you appoint a deputy treasurer. That way, if you or your treasurer are out of town for a reporting deadline for some reason, they can file your reports for you. So when I'm talking about these reports, again, that's if you have received any contributions, made any expenses, or any outstanding loans and debts are under your account for your campaign. All right. This is reported with the Form 30A. It's just Ohio Campaign Finance Report is the title of the form. And all these reports and any accompanying forms, because every contribution, every expense, all has its own form. And then you have a cover sheet, which is that 30A form. Those can all be accessed online as well. And if you don't want to access them online, but you need to file a report, guess what you could do? You can call us and ask for copies. No problem. So some reporting deadlines, again, I'm not going to get into this much, but it's there for you. These are the dates you need to look out for if you're running for office. June 11th, all right, is the deadline to report anything that you raise, receive, you expend through June 4th. This is the soonest date that's coming up that you'll need to report on anything. I've got those dates because this is pre-election reporting, and then we've got post-election reporting. So just keep these dates in mind if, again, you do plan on receiving contributions and making expenses. Okay, any questions on campaign finance or anything at all? Because I think I'm pretty good here.
If you forget to mention something, can you put on the post? Or you have to do it quarterly or monthly?
Can we put on the one? I'm sorry.
Like any campaign finances do you receive, do you have to directly kind of disclose or right away, or you can do it after a few months because you forgot about it? How does that work?
We
Because
send you
many-
reminders. We'll send
this
you
is the
reminders.
reminders.
Absolutely, yes. So we do have a calendar that we go by, and on those dates is when we do send out letters reminding you that you need to disclose any contributions, expenses, et cetera. You need to report on this certain date.
Okay,
So
so
that-
if you don't do it on 13 or 30, you have to do it by December. 31st.
Yes.
That's the end, okay.
Right, yep. So those dates are all outlined on there for you. And we usually give you like 2 weeks notice. Like June 1st ahead of June 11th. And it's not 2 weeks, but it's almost there. 10 days, I think, is what it is actually. Okay. So there any other questions?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Again, we're one call away, or feel free to stop by. No problem.
Any questions about anything? We've given you a lot of information tonight. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, one question I have is our state